So again, I'm Liz Royer. I am the Executive Director of the Vermont Rural Water Association. So we are a nonprofit with 11 employees, and we do technical assistance and training for public drinking water and wastewater systems throughout the state. And I am also co-chair, soon to be the only chair, of Vermont WARN, which is the Water and Wastewater Agency Response Network, which is similar to other mutual aid networks in various states. So I actually have supposed to be in 2 other locations today at conferences. I'm supposed to be in Savannah, Georgia for the National Rural Water Conference, and I'm supposed to be in Phoenix, Arizona for the National WARN Chairs Conference. And unfortunately, you get the view and I don't, but hopefully you can enjoy this location. We have our conference here every May, so it's a great spot. So like I mentioned, Vermont WARN is the state's only water and wastewater mutual aid network. It was started initially in 2008. It's mostly administered through the Environmental Protection Agency. And from 2008 to about 2015, it was kind of used. You know, there was a steering committee established and there were meetings, but then it kind of faded away, at least in Vermont. So at 2020, at the start of the pandemic, EPA Region 1 out of Boston really pushed the network in Vermont and kind of twisted my arm and said, you need to get this going again. There's going to be a lot of things happening due to the pandemic. There are various things like masks were distributed through the WARN networks to water and wastewater systems throughout the state. So currently we have a 12-member steering committee that includes representatives from both state and federal agencies, Vermont Rural Water and other NGOs, and we also have 6 representatives from various utilities, water and wastewater utilities from around the state. Currently we have 64 utility members. That means that they've signed the mutual aid agreement. That does not mean that they have to provide assistance if requested, but it allows them to be reimbursed through FEMA due to that mutual aid agreement being in place. And there is a WARN in every state. There's kind of various levels of WARNs. Florida is kind of the gold standard, as they are in most disaster response. They have actual staff, full-time staff that are paid. They have an extensive database of all of the equipment available through various utilities throughout Vermont. They have regional response teams that are staged and ready to go at any moment. But they also have the history of many more larger disasters. So here in Vermont, as things go, you know, we have minimal resources and minimal funding for most of our efforts. So the Vermont WARN, there's no funding and no staff. The steering committee kind of runs things and the chairs kind of gets thrown in to kind of manage and administer the network. Like I mentioned, we are part of the National WARN. And so folks from every state, we meet every other week online and then once a year in person. And that's managed by the Environmental Protection Agency and the American Water Works Association. So right now, like I said, I'm one of the co-chairs. Amy Palachuk from ANR from the wastewater program is my other co-chair, but she is leaving the agency in a week or 2, so she is stepping down. So Vermont WARN and Vermont Rural Water, we kind of are intermeshed in a lot of ways. So basically I donate my time to manage the WARN, and my staff kind of becomes the staff of the WARN if we need to go out to different systems and see what's actually happening. I send my staff out to do that. So we are a nonprofit trade association providing technical assistance and training to water and wastewater systems around the state. Currently, we have 11 staff, and we do receive some state and federal funding for our programs, as well as membership dues from over 300 water and wastewater systems throughout the state. So Vermont WARN, some of the issues prior to the flooding, like I mentioned, COVID response. We talked about power outages and prioritizing restoration of services to pump stations, and kind of, the treatment plants had been prioritized, but not kind of the pump stations and some of the more peripheral infrastructure for water and wastewater systems. So we've been talking to Green Mountain Power and some other power utilities about prioritizing those folks. Of course, cybersecurity, hot topic. It's a huge topic in water and wastewater right now. Again, it's an extra challenge for Vermont, lack of resources, old infrastructure, old software, old infrastructure and equipment that operates on old software, all of the things like, no, you need to upgrade your software. Well, if we upgrade the software, then we can't run our treatment plant. So this is kind of the constant challenges that we face, trying to figure out solutions for very, very small systems that lack resources. We're hoping to maybe get an intern just to have somebody to help with kind of some of the administration and communication, but that's kind of an ongoing process to find an intern for us. Accomplishments in the past year. So we did have a roundtable training at Johnson, or no, what is it now? VSU, Johnson location, Johnson State, in January with panel discussions, which ended up including July, August, and December flooding from last year. So we had a lot of state folks in the room, and quite a few system operators and managers as well. Act 143, this was signed by the governor in late May this year, and went through this legislative session. So this is first responder status for water and wastewater personnel. I've gotten some feedback that, oh, well, why don't we don't need special privileges. But kind of the basis for this, there were a couple situations where access was restricted for water and wastewater personnel to get to their own plants or to the treatment facility where they were trying to assist and get it back up and running again. So the classic case was during Irene in Wilmington. The wastewater plant has one operator. They had extensive damage. They needed to get some help in there. They needed their engineer to get there, and they needed one of my Vermont Rural Water staff to get in there to try to help them get things running again. And the two folks that were not municipal employees were denied access at the checkpoint. So the operator went down to the town garage, ripped off some old red municipal plates from those trucks, drove them to the checkpoint, and then they were able to pass through. So this is just kind of one of the frustrations that we've had. There's also kind of the dilemma of a lot of community water systems are not municipally, like traditionally town or village or city owned. There's probably 78 fire districts in Vermont, and those fire districts are the primary drinking water provider for that village area. So fire districts are kind of this weird group that they're not part of Vermont League of Cities and Towns. They're kind of unknown. Nobody really manages them. Nobody really helps them besides, we try to help them with some technical issues. So it's hard for them kind of to get involved in community town planning, town emergency planning efforts, because sometimes they have a great relationship with the folks in the town office, and sometimes they have not a great relationship with those folks. So it's just been a challenge. And in a recent example, in Plainfield, in 2 months ago now, I keep saying last month, but it's been 2 months. In Plainfield, they have two operators that run both their drinking water and wastewater systems, not just their treatment plants, but also the collection and distribution system. So all of the pipes, all of the infrastructure in town is under their control. And so the chief operator was there. He was in the basement of the wastewater treatment plant. Things were not going well there. The assistant operator was trying to get there from Marshfield. There was all sorts of not roadblocks, but people standing around watching the flooding happen, watching the bridges go out. And he was significantly delayed in getting to the treatment plant, which could have been a huge safety issue for that one operator that was there in the basement, which was starting to fill with propane in the wastewater plant. So it's just more of an access issue versus like getting all the special privileges that come with being first responders. It's just like, we just need to be able to help our own folks and get to our own facilities. And then we finally, generator maintenance was related to some of kind of that prioritization for power restoration issues. You know, it used to be a lot of the generator companies had parts on hand, and that's not always the case anymore, just with supply chain issues and just the new reality. So we had, we're going to do a hands-on class at least once a year to bring in folks, talk about what parts you need to have on hand. You know, what do you need to have portable generators? What kind of hookups do you need? And so that's been really popular, and we will be continuing that. And so being Vermont, again, you know, not everyone likes to go through formal networks to request assistance. They just want to help their neighbors and not talk about it and not get any credit. And so, you know, kind of our WARN membership was lacking. You know, there were a lot of municipalities, even towns that hadn't joined. So we were looking for ways to encourage membership. And one of the suggestions was that we have purchase equipment that would be used for members only. So we worked with the Vermont Department of Health, and they received a CDC grant. So in 2022, we were able to purchase 2 trailers and some emergency response equipment. So that was actually great timing. So we had everything ready to go when July 2023 flooding hit. They both, a lot of the things we purchased were also great for preventative maintenance. And then, like I mentioned, they were used during the last 2 years in flood response. So some of our original equipment, so GPR, 2 GPR units, so that's ground penetrating radar. So one of the challenges in Vermont, we have a lot of plastic water line, which is difficult to locate through traditional methods, which is using metal detectors. So the ground penetrating radar is one way to try to help find plastic lines. Fortunately, they don't work so great when there's rocky soils, which we have almost everywhere in Vermont, but occasionally those are helpful. Correlators are just trying to see if there's any big leaks in your water system, that, you know, how much water is coming through this hydrant versus how much water is coming through this hydrant. Tilt and pan sewer line camera. Again, this is great in some situations, but not so great in flood response because it is a very small robotic camera that we can put into a sewer line. Well, during floods, a lot of sewer lines are filled with silt and gravel, or may just drop off into a river. So this is actually really great for preventive maintenance, but not so great for flood response. Same thing with a valve and hydrant exerciser. A lot of systems, it's just, you know, they're understaffed. They don't have a lot of time to get out. You should be exercising your valves at least once a year. There's a lot of systems that are like, oh, we haven't touched that valve in 20 years. We don't mess with it. It's like, well, if you have a flood, if you have a disaster, if you have an emergency, if you have a huge fire in town, you need to be able to turn your valves. So that's been popular as well. Again, just kind of general safety gear, lights, some portable generators, boats, trash pumps. Those have been very popular and used quite a bit, and some portable water tanks. So lessons learned since the July 2023 floods, we added NSF approved hose. So this was as a result of Woodstock being on a do not drink order. Woodstock had some old fire hose that they used to connect part of their drinking water distribution system. The state was not sure if there was PFAS found in that hose. And so the town was put on a do not drink order. So we now have, I think we have almost 500 feet, maybe a little more of NSF approved hose that can be used for drinking water purposes. Fans and dehumidifiers. This is a little frustrating as well. We had a few of the wastewater plants that could have used these things. You know, we went to some of the different FEMA locations in some of the schools. We saw fans and dehumidifiers stacked up everywhere. Like, oh, can we get a couple of those for the wastewater plant? No, we could not get those for the wastewater plant. So we went and bought them. Hydrovacs, so these are really cool. They kind of look like wheelbarrows, but it's like a shop vac wheelbarrow. So if you have, you're trying to get into a manhole, or you're digging down to try to access a potentially broken water line, you can kind of suction out with this portable hydrovac. GFCI extension cords for wet conditions. Learned that lesson real quickly. And then we have a Starlink internet system. That was also another more in 2023 with communication because of cell service being pretty spotty in some of the locations we were working. So things we were looking to add still, we would love to have a trailer mounted dewatering pump. We do have some municipalities that have those available, but they also need to come with a person to operate them. So they often have the equipment available, but not extra personnel, especially on the nights and weekends to go out and run those for some of these flood impacted facilities. Absorbent booms and pads, that just happened July this year. Lindenville and their wastewater plant had some floating oil inside their wastewater plant that they wanted to get rid of. So we're trying to figure out what's the best way to do that, working with the A&R response team, hazmat team on how we can facilitate inside the facility issues versus out in the environment. We do need to get some more PPE and safety gear. That's kind of one of the first things that we hand out and have run out of that at this point. And additional health and first aid. It's just sometimes we're the most visible folks because we're out working, and on the infrastructure in the communities. And so we get a lot of questions just from people walking by and need a lot of things. We handed out a lot of water this year in Plainfield. So here's one of the trailers. Again, we have two. We kind of have them, one's more for drinking water, one's more for wastewater, but we swap out equipment all the time. And then we did have a couple of trainings. This is at the Montpelier water treatment plant for public works staff and water and wastewater operators to learn some of this more technical equipment. So the goal is to have utilities be able to borrow some of this stuff. Right now, we don't really have that capacity, but that's our goal. All right, let me take a quick drink here. So July 2023, you all know the story. Already saturated soils, slow moving storms over 72 hours, and surprise. This was interesting because I showed this last year at the National Warren Conference, and I was like, thinking in my head, like Florida, they see 22 inches of rain all the time. And I was like, we only got 9 inches of rain, but everybody was pretty impressed by that. Just with our topography, with the narrow mountain valleys, they did understand 9 inches of rain here is a lot different than 9 inches of rain in Florida. So compared to Tropical Storm Irene, so Warren was activated, so this is 2023. In 2011, I don't know if it was officially activated. There was some information sent out through the Warren, but I don't think there was any equipment shared through the Warren. So in 2023, Warren was activated and functions pretty efficiently. One specific request came in the first few days, that it's kind of, a little bit of chaos. Nobody's quite sure what they need. They just know that, things aren't working. So it ended up, we just had to start sending folks out to these water and wastewater facilities to kind of get some eyes on and say, okay, well, where should we start? It's just so overwhelming in some of these places. Another great thing that was different was the availability of social media and mobile technology. We talked to Brandon and Wilmington and some other communities that were hit pretty hard during Irene, and they're like, it was just so different. Like now you have your phone in your pocket, you can instantly take pictures of things that are broken, and do all your documentation for FEMA, and text somebody to see to get what you need. Virtual meetings were also a huge plus. Having the FEMA applicant briefings online was really great for our folks, especially they're at their water and wastewater plant. They haven't left for 48 hours. They didn't really have a chance to be able to travel somewhere else besides like what they were working on. Same thing with on the drinking water side, the boil water notices, all of that could be distributed much more quickly. We kind of kept an eye on what the chatter was online and on social media. Drones were available for some remote access and to help with some of the mapping. So drinking water system impacts, again, this is July 2023 flooding. There were over 20 water systems on boil water. Most of those were issued out of an abundance of caution. Some were due to damage in the distribution system, so main breaks, leaks, or pressure issues. 2 surface water systems had turbidity issues. Some had floodwaters over their wells or weren't quite sure how high the water got because they couldn't access that area. One of the challenges definitely was media coverage. There was a lot of misinformation on how or why to boil water. We did catch BT Digger said that boiling water could remove fuel oil, so quickly got that one corrected. But that's definitely something that we want to work more with the media in the future, just to make sure that it's very clear how you need to boil your water and what that actually can remove. So do not drink orders. I mentioned Woodstock already. Again, so they serve about 1,700 customers and most businesses in town. The system had trouble keeping up with the demand there because of all of the breaks and leaks that they had. And again, they connected the non-NSF certified fire hose to fill their storage. The state did not like that, so they were put on the do not drink order until that could be corrected. And then in Morrisville, they serve about 2,800 customers and most businesses plus the hospital. Their sources were submerged by river flooding. The operators were pretty sure the pumps had been shut off so that water did not reach the treatment plant or go into storage. But again, it was unclear. Nobody was sure at that what happened at that kind of worst moment. So I was going back and forth between Johnson and Hardwick a lot last summer, and I really wanted a Diet Coke at the Morrisville McDonald's. Unfortunately, they were following the boil water. It went to boil water at that point, so they were following the notice, but no Diet Coke that day. So at the Johnson wastewater plant, this is kind of where we started our flood response last summer. So this is SBR's sequential batch reactor. It's the type of wastewater facility. Sorry, some of this is a little technical. This is a very small wastewater plant, even for Vermont. It's 0.15 million gallons per day coming through there. And their entire plant was submerged to 7.5 feet. You'll see the picture in a minute. They have 2 operators there that run that plant, but they also run another wastewater plant and 3 water systems. So this is pretty typical for a situation in Vermont. The operators are spread pretty thin, and it's hard to prioritize in some cases, like where do we start, which system do we work with first? Here, it was pretty clear Johnson had the most damage, so that's where they started. Another thing that was a little different here, which is probably different than other states also, so there's a lot of municipal systems and a lot of other systems in Vermont are run by contract ops companies. So that's been a little confusing for them in working with FEMA, that there's this private company that runs the water system, but it's owned by the Village of Johnson. located in the town of Johnson. So it's been a lot to kind of get figured out. You know, and then as those FEMA folks kind of turn over, it's explaining everything again and again. So here's the red circle is where the wastewater plant is. So it's kind of right where the two rivers converge. So they got hit from both sides a little bit. All right, so here's Dan Kopp, the operator. That is the water level inside on the first floor of the wastewater treatment plant. You do have to walk up steps to get to the first floor. So that adds up to probably more than 7.5 feet. So through Warren, the city of Burlington provided a 500 gallon per minute Godwin trailer to pump the decant off of their holding tanks and out of their SBRs. We also had a bunch of smaller pumps in there, a generator, the dehumidifiers, and provided them some KN95 masks, again, that couldn't be sourced through other means. The car floating in the river on Railroad Street tore their 8-inch ductile iron sewer crossing off. The replacement pipe ended up being sourced through AOT, which was great. You know, Warren is good for the smaller stuff, but kind of, you know, not a lot of facilities have a lot of 8-inch ductile lying around. So we had to go kind of searching through other means. I think it did go through the SEOC to get to the Agency of Transportation. And then the Warren trailer was actually used to hold a chlorine tank. The system was asked by the state to do emergency disinfection because all across the news and in the media it was like, you know, raw sewage going into the river and this is affecting our recreation. And I mean, at that point it's like 99% flood water. It's not like what people picture raw sewage, and what you could see coming out of the pipe was clear. So it wasn't raw sewage, but they were asked again to do kind of emergency disinfection while their ultraviolet system was down. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, just a quick question.
Yep.
I'm a New Yorker, even though I rep Vermont. And the reason I'm asking is New York's spending a lot of time, and it's taking years, right, because of grant money, but their stormwater system and their sewer system are combined in a lot of municipalities still. Some of the bigger cities, or if they've already gotten a grant, are splitting them apart so that you're not overtaking the wastewater. Is Vermont actively doing that? Or are a lot of the plants still combined storm and sewer?
Yeah, the larger, like Burlington and Rutland, have the combined sewer still. You know, as you know, it's, you know, millions and millions and billions of dollars to separate them.
So but you're looking at the smaller plants.
The smaller plants, no, they don't have CSOs here. Yeah. Any questions? So this is kind of the brand new pump that came from Burlington, and the operator that they sent, and ended up working out really well in this case. It's also, you know, figuring out where you can get the truck and trailer from, and then which roads are open, which bridges are open, and, you know, who has to drive the furthest around, and kind of sketchy roads. So it's a little bit of a game, but this worked out pretty quickly here in Johnson.
How many of those are in the state? Is that the only one?
No, South Burlington has some, Rutland. I know some of the bigger systems have them, but again, it always comes back to, we have the equipment available, but we don't have the personnel available to drive it to where it needs to go, or to stay there and help out with it. So that's why we would like to get our own to have, but yeah, it's, you know, the bigger states have hundreds of these sitting in warehouses, hundreds of generators sitting in warehouses. We're just never going to have that in Vermont. So this is when it was set up to do the disinfection. The chlorine's dripping down into the manhole here. All right, next on to Hardwick. They have an aerated lagoon system, which is a little bit different of a treatment process than they have in Johnson. Unfortunately, they were in the middle of a pretty expensive upgrade there. Also a pretty small plant in the scheme of things for Vermont. I would say it's medium-sized. So they had their control building, their lab, The garage inundated with floodwaters to about 5 feet here. Same thing, basically one operator. He also runs a couple of water systems. You know, it's hard to do any type of flood response on your own, so you always need to bring in whoever is available, who also can get there and not need a lot of guidance, right? So I think that's why a lot of times it ends up being Vermont rural water staff. They kind of know these systems already, so they can get there and jump in and just start doing things. Through Warren, in this case, we were able to source 2 chemical feed pumps plus some extra tubing and parts to take to the Hardwick wastewater plant. So this is kind of when the floodwaters were receding a little bit, but you can see the Connex boxes tipped over. This was all of part of their construction that was happening there. There's our trailer that we took there. In this case, they just needed like a dry and clean space to work in. So they set up some laptops and put some equipment in the trailer, because everything else was just a mess. You couldn't work anywhere else. Here's grabbing, this was from Barton. We grabbed some of the chem feed pumps. And then Ludlow, this is kind of the last of the big 3 that were impacted in that July 2023 flooding. It's an aeration plant. This is a little bit bigger of a plant. Their challenges is that their flows vary a lot depending on the ski area and the seasonal residences. So, you know, it's designed to treat a lot more water, but on a daily basis, and in the summer, it's definitely not anywhere close to where their permanent flow is. So they had the most visible damage there due to the strong current and boulders, and I think even a car was pushed partially through their wastewater treatment facility. There they have 1 operator and 2 kind of assistant operators. Again, they also run the town water system and they manage the 5 dams. So they were told the dams were the priorities there last summer, and so we basically sent one of my staff just to kind of work there full time for a couple of months to work on the wastewater system to get everything back up. And through Warren and Ludlow, they borrowed a 500-gallon pumper truck, and they had some of us running their drinking water samples up to the lab. You know, it's for them to take 4 hours out of their day to go drive to the lab is not really a good use of their time. So here's Ludlow. They had raised their generator after Irene, but it was still taken out by this flood also. Here's the pumper truck, not very big. We need a bigger one. That's what we decided next time. That's on our long-term wish list. And they also had a need for some pipe. They also tried to get it through the SCOC. So the challenge in this case, there was pipe available through a private company, but they said that they weren't gonna, I can't remember where the truck was, somewhere far away, like, but they weren't gonna run the truck to Vermont until the truck was full. So we had to get some people that had more clout than we did to make some calls to get them to just bring the pipe, like, we need it now. So Vermont Warren's connected systems to share equipment and resources, like I've mentioned, but the needs were constantly changing. In a lot of cases, the needs were changing faster than we could respond and try to find whatever equipment was needed. We have an online form. The Agency of Natural Resources hosts our website. We have an online form. There were some requests coming through that. A lot of requests were coming from DEC, the drinking water and wastewater staff, for calling around to the impacted systems and saying, what do you need? What can we get to you? What would be helpful? And then again, my staff out at the systems kind of calling me like, I think they need another pump. Can you like see what you can do? So again, the challenges, like I mentioned before, Vermont systems are fiercely independent, still trying to change that stigma. They don't want to ask for help. They don't want to go through any kind of formal official channel. They just want to go help their neighbor and not say anything. They don't want credit for it, but again, this poses the issue for reimbursement and liability. And again, we're seeing more and more safety issues occurring as these floods are just more intense and that and more frequent. So again, everybody kind of just knows each other. They're just gonna text their buddy to see, but in these situations, they don't really have a lot of time to just spend on the phone calling around, seeing who has what. That's what we ended up doing in Plainfield, was just kind of the first day of standing there, just making calls and texts and like, all right, who has this? Who can get here tonight? Who can get here tomorrow? It's just very time consuming. And when you have one or two operators trying to do the actual work, they need somebody else there. Again, yeah, the operators are overwhelmed. They don't really have the time and energy to manage other people coming in. We had a lot of discussions about EMAC and bringing in folks to help from other states, and it was just going to be too much to figure out for everyone. And again, they only want help from people that they trust. They don't want somebody they don't know coming in and messing around with their system. This is personal for them. So July 2024, just check my time real quick here. We sent out several emails cautioning systems of the potential flooding. I think we had a little more notice maybe, or just because of what we had gone through in July 23, we knew this was definitely a strong possibility. So in July, we had 9 drinking water systems on boil water notices or unable to deliver water to customers. I think that was one of the things also we learned in July 2023 was that it's not just the boil water or do not drink orders that matter. It's the places like Marshfield where they just didn't have water when you turn on the tap and nothing's coming out. So that I think that's something that's been added to the reporting that the state does. This time there were 9 wastewater systems impacted. Only 2 facilities had structural damage though. It wasn't quite as severe, at least in our industry. And again, most of these facilities have emergency response plans, which are helpful, but it's becoming almost impossible to be prepared for the frequency and the severity of the flooding that we're needing. So, we're encouraging everyone, and we're going to be having some workshops next year to really make those plans from, based on what we've seen in the last 2 years. Again, storm totals were a little bit less than they were in 2023, but again, we all know what the impacts were this time. So Plainfield was our focus in July this year. They had very extensive damage to their distribution and collection systems. It was complicated by both of those systems being entirely gravity run pipe infrastructure. It's hard to explain, but usually you have pump stations that pump, water or wastewater up and down hills. But Plainfield has it. I mean, it's kind of neat. They had it all worked out that it's just all gravity. But that made it complicated when there were main breaks. So the biggest focus was Mill Street Bridge over Great Brook. And again, here you have two operators running all the wastewater and water components. There's no public works department there. So they needed to isolate sections and install temporary water and sewer lines. It was a little confusing because the timing of the temporary bridge coming in, it kept changing, and we weren't sure when it was going to happen, if it was going to happen, if there was going to be, was there going to be is there going to be a permanent bridge? It's just, when might that happen? So what you do for the water and wastewater lines is greatly dependent. Like, do they have to overwinter? Like, are we going to have to figure out how to, keep this water line moving over the winter so it doesn't freeze up? Luckily, wastewater is a little warmer, so you don't have to worry about that. But so we sourced hoses for their pumps. We did get a Vector truck that was from Essex Junction. They sent somebody in on a Friday night, which is great. Safety equipment, again, that was a big thing there. They had their the basement of their wastewater plant kept filling with propane, so we had to get some blowers and gas meters in there. So here we are. This is when we were standing there making a lot of phone calls, trying to figure out what to do first. And then EJP came in and really helped us with kind of getting some of the valves to kind of valve off the pipes that we needed valved off. And we had a crash course on valve assembly, which was interesting. And then here's this, the blue line is the water line. So this is running this across the bridge here. And then this, can't really see it as well, but anyway, there's a black, you can see it on this one. This is once the bridge is in, the black, the temporary bridge. The black line is the wastewater sewer line across there. So again, we're still having a lot of meetings, like what needs to be done before the winter hits, what's the priority, you know, what should we do long term? You know, should we keep the system structure how it is or reroute things, or, you know, it's just constant discussions. And then in the late July flooding, we helped with the sorbent booms, again at the Linden wastewater plant. And then there were a lot of facilities that just needed some extra treatment chemicals, so transporting those back and forth. And then the St. Johnsbury water plant was struck by lightning, and that took out some of their controllers, but which wouldn't have been a big deal. They can run things manually. But there were high turbidities in their source water because it's a surface water source. So they had to frequently backwash their filters, which meant that somebody had to come in every 4 hours, including overnight, which they weren't too happy about, especially after, you know, a week or so. They're like, this is getting real old real quick. Yep. So it took a lot of searching because the controllers that they had were very old. They couldn't just replace them with newer controllers. They had to be the original controllers. The company had already rebuilt them once and said they weren't going to do that again. So we had to have a lot of folks dig through their junk piles, as they call them. In the end, we did find some old controllers taken out of the St. Albans. They have 2 drinking water treatment plants that we were able to use. Again, you know, we're seeing much lower rainfall totals having more severe impacts. So this is, again, something that we're going to have to be incorporating into all of the emergency response plans. Oh, this is the control. This is the controller that we found. Doesn't look very exciting, but I was very excited after 3 days of trying to find that thing. So lessons learned: move as much as you can out of the floodplain. It seems pretty obvious, but even Hardwick lost their computer in July 2023, and unfortunately that operator was on vacation. The backup operator didn't even think about it. They lost their laptop again July 2024, just because they didn't just take the laptop home with them or move it up to the town office. So vehicles, equipment, supplies, paperwork, that's a huge thing. We have a lot of systems that, you know, all of their mapping is still paper. They're trying to get it digitized, but it's a very slow process. Store file backups in a different location. Again, Johnson, they had everything on an external hard drive, but it was sitting in a drawer next to their computer where everything got flooded. Closed valves on fuel tanks. This was definitely something that we need to talk more statewide about, is that the amounts of you know, fuel oil or just all these different chemicals coming into these wastewater treatment plants and accumulating there is a huge issue and a huge safety issue for these operators. I think we just haven't talked about it enough. So I'm hoping we can figure out something just for the safety of the operators. So yeah, closing valves on fuel tanks, turning off circuit breakers, just kind of basic stuff that, oh, now we know why you do that. We've been working with everybody to work with their local emergency management directors. I think this happens in a lot of cases, but in many towns it doesn't, especially if they're not, again, a town-owned water or wastewater system. And again, trying to encourage these water and wastewater operators to get involved in any kind of local emergency management or hazard mitigation efforts. And finally, checking that their insurance is up to date. This, again, was a big issue in the past 2 years that, oh, right, we forgot to add that, or like somewhere like Hardwick where they were in the middle of a big upgrade, you know, they were gonna change their insurance policy once it was all done. Well, never got done. So, all right, I think that's it.